Welcome into the Inside Scoop. We are live from Nashville, Tennessee. Today is Sunday, April 13th, and as always, I am your host, Josh Newberg. Before we get going, make sure you guys are locked into the best recruiting channel on all of YouTube. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you have not. We got a busy show today because recruiting is buzzing. We had spring games all across the country, but today, we're going to talk some spring game talk, but we are talking Tennessee. And they're moving on, the Volunteers moving on from Nico Iamaleava. We're going to attack it from a few different angles today. We're going to have Pete Nakos on the show. He is the one that got this story going on Thursday when he said that Nico and Tennessee were in negotiations. There's some pushback on that, but by Saturday, Nico and Tennessee had split up. So we're going to talk about it. We got Andy Staples on the show. We're going to cover Oregon recruiting, Tennessee recruiting, and USC on today's show. But first, let's talk about the biggest developments in college football recruiting from over the weekend. Now, we're going to start with Tennessee moving on from Nico. Yes, the Nico Iamaleava era in Knoxville is over. Remember back in 2022? At the time, Nico had signed a blockbuster NIL deal worth more than $2 million per year. Now, that number ended up being the center of contention, and it is what caused this whole thing to go down over the last 4 or 5 days. So, at the time, when Nico signed that deal, he was one of the highest paid, but not in 2025. You see, there are quarterbacks getting paid well over $2 million a year, and I think that's what Nico and his family looked at. Now, we go back to the reporting of this. Pete Nakos of On3 nailed this one on Thursday, that Nico was trying to renegotiate that original deal. The original report received a ton of pushback, but by Saturday morning, Nico was no longer with the program. So how did we get here so quickly? Well, the fact that Nico wanted more money was one of them, but I think it was really the fact that he wasn't worth the money he was asking for. I think that is where, look, Nico was playing lights out and killing it all over the place. I don't think Tennessee would have hesitated. They would have given him more money. But either way, this thing worked out where Josh Heupel made a decision that I think is going to reverberate through college football, at least for the weeks and months to come, maybe years to come. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. I mean, we saw the Jaden Rashada stuff go down with Florida, but it doesn't really compare to seeing Nico play for 2 years and then leave during spring. And now that the Nico era is over, I think we can all be honest. When I said on a video a couple weeks ago that I did not think that Nico was, at the time, living up to the hype in Knoxville. Now, I said that he had a chance to right the ship, but at the time, and Tennessee fans vigorously disagreed with me, but I thought when you look back at what Nico has done, I don't think you can say that he lived up to the hype. Now, of course, we don't know what he's going to do in year 3, but at least Tennessee can say that they did not get the value from that deal that most expected when it was signed, and I think most Tennessee fans will now agree that Nico never lived up to the hype. All right, let's move on. One more visit to Oregon. Who am I talking about? Number 1 overall recruit, Jackson Cantwell. Kind of a weird deal here. Last week, he came out and said, quote, "I might be closer to the end than I thought. I don't know how an OV would change that really." Meaning, I know my teams, and I don't think any more visits is going to change the way that I'm thinking here. But 2 days later, he's set to take an official visit to Oregon next week. Now, Pete Nakos came out last week, so did Steve Wiltfong, right on this channel, and said that there's 3 teams out in front for Jackson Cantwell. In no order, it's Georgia, Miami, or Oregon. And this was before the Oregon news. So how do you guys take this? What does this mean? Is this now a slam dunk for Oregon, or does it show that Oregon was probably on the outside looking in of those top 3 teams and needed to get them on campus one more time just to be in this thing? So you guys let me know. What do you think? Is it going to be Georgia? Is it going to be Miami? Or is it going to be Oregon? Because I can't figure this one out. All right. 5 stars at Ohio State. 2 key players on campus. We're talking offensive tackle Felix Ojo out of the state of Texas and Tyler Atkinson from Georgia. Now, Felix Ojo is trending heavily towards Texas, but this was his second visit to Ohio State and not his last. Ojo arrived on Friday. He didn't stick around until Saturday. He went to the Florida Gator spring game, but He's promised to be back at the end of May for an official visit, and I think this is kind of the formula that Ohio State needs. They got him on campus once already. This was his second visit. He'll be on campus for a third at the end of May. We'll see what happens. Now, Tyler Atkinson was also back in Columbus. He is the number 1 ranked linebacker in America, and this time he brought his family. That's always a good sign. His mom and sister were along with him, and he told Steve Wiltfong after the trip, quote, "I still feel really good about Ohio State." And this weekend isn't about commits for Ohio State because top recruits aren't committing yet. If you're a top recruit, meaning like in the top 50, in the top 100, that 1% of 1%, those names aren't coming off the board. A majority of these guys are going to take their official visits in the summer, and that's why it's setting up to be a big summer for the Buckeyes. I think that this national championship momentum, it's going to pay off. And it's going to pay off when it matters, and that's when commitment season rolls around, right after the official visits go down. All right, the last topic I want to talk about today is a top running back sets a commit date. Running back Javian Osborne, he was on this channel recently, and he told me in the interview, I might be ready to make that decision earlier than I thought. He's going to make that announcement on May 3rd. Of course, we're going to try to get him here on the On3 Recruits channel, but it's going to come down to 2 teams, Michigan or Notre Dame. And this weekend, he was back at Notre Dame for a second time this spring, and he's currently trending heavily in the Irish direction on the RPM. But next weekend, he'll be at Michigan, and that'll set the table for his May 3rd decision. What do you guys think? I mean, right now, I think it's Notre Dame, but Michigan gets him on campus. It'll likely be his last visit before a decision. So you guys let me know, where is Javian Osborne going to end up? Those are the biggest developments of the weekend. If you guys got more, please let me know what you guys are thinking. It's been a busy weekend. We're here with On3's Andy Staples, and I just got to ask you, who gets the blame for the Nico era ending in Knoxville? Is it Coach Heupel? Is it Nico? Is it the dad? Who you blaming?
It's Team Nico. It's the whole shebang. It's the dad and friend advisors who are not good at negotiating, and it's Nico who played the way he played last year. Because here's the thing. Tennessee would not have had a problem with Nico asking for more money if Tennessee thought Nico was worth more money. Clearly they did not.
Yeah. And this is kind of something that, behind the scenes, I mean, we heard brewing going into the first transfer portal. Are you surprised that it took for spring ball to be basically completed for this thing to finally blow the top off of it?
Well, it's because he's being advised by people who don't know what they're doing. And that's what happened. Like if Drew Rosenhaus or WME or CAA is representing Nico Iamaleava, this gets handled quietly in December. They leverage Miami or somebody else who's shopping for a quarterback, and they get a raise at Tennessee. But they didn't handle that right. They asked for an astronomical amount in December. Tennessee said no. And instead of leveraging in December when there were more shoppers in the marketplace and you could go to another SEC school, they were like, oh, okay. And then they just waited till the spring portal where there aren't as many shoppers, where you can't go to another SEC school. And all of a sudden, they don't have a whole lot of leverage. I think they thought that, and this is kind of part of it when your dad is your agent as opposed to a Drew Rosenhaus type. Like Drew Rosenhaus isn't sentimental about this. He's got a lot of clients. He's going to take a pretty realistic view of how good you are. Daddy's going to think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Sure.
Well, Dad's going to think you're Joe Montana, Dan Marino, and Peyton Manning rolled into one. And that's probably what they thought. And they thought Tennessee would think that too. And Tennessee's looking at it more realistically, like, okay, what's our record with him? What's our record without him? What's the worst case scenario with? Worst case scenario without? This ain't worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can kind of get the sense that the family's representing him, because when you negotiate, it can be tough, sitting at the negotiation table.
It's emotional.
Hey, he didn't play the greatest at SEC play. So it's emotional, like you said. And when you have the father representing you, those emotions can get in the way of decision making. That being said, do you think that this is going to change college football?
No, because this has happened in college football. It's just these guys did it so stupidly that we found out about it. But this happens over and over every December and every April now. There are guys that go to their schools and say, I want this. And the school's like, okay, we don't think you're worth it. Go somewhere else. That's not abnormal. That is the market doing what the market does. And so now what I think is going to happen is, and things have changed. Like Nico was working off his original deal.
Correct.
And so there's a couple pieces to that. One, Tennessee thought that they were paying him fairly. He was scheduled to make like $2.4 million for 2025, which probably is fair, but is less than what some of the quarterbacks are making now. And they did their deals more recently. But also, because this is such an old deal, it doesn't have any clawback language in it, which if there had been, I don't know that he leaves. Because now if you sign a deal, you're probably dealing with some sort of language that says, whatever we paid you up front, you owe us some of that back because you didn't complete the term of the deal. And they can't keep you from going to play at another school, but they can certainly say you owe us this money, and a court will agree with them.
Yeah.
But Nico's deal didn't have that.
Jaden Rashada and his father are going to the next step in the lawsuit is tomorrow. I believe discovery starts tomorrow in Jaden Rashada's lawsuit against Billy Napier and the Florida Gators. Do you see some similarities in what happened at UF as what's happening at Tennessee?
That case is a little bit different because that was a deal where someone inflated the value of a contract past the point the person who was underwriting the contract was willing to pay. And when the person underwriting the contract found out how much they were on the hook for, they're like, I'm not paying it. And so that's a completely different case. And the fact that it's going to discovery leads me to believe that it might move toward a settlement at some point soon, because I don't think anybody involved really wants some of that stuff to come out. I would love it personally. I'd love to read it. It'd be very juicy. But I think if you are Billy Napier, if you're Hugh Hathcock, the Florida booster involved there, I don't think you want any of that stuff coming out.
Did Jaden Rashada, though, have a big-time agent at the time, or was it mostly his family?
No, weirdly, the same lawyer, Michael Caspino, that helped Nico get his deal at Tennessee was initially helping Rashada. Now, that's not who helped Rashada get that deal with Florida, but it is who negotiated the deal with Miami with Rashada. So there is some similar DNA to these two cases. And the other thing that's very similar about it is you've got a dad that's dragging the kid around. And I think if the choices were left up to the players in this situation, they'd be a lot less reviled and they'd probably have happier careers.
So now here we are post breakup. I mean, it's still fresh. Where do you think Tennessee goes? Where do you think Nico goes from here?
Well, Nico doesn't have as many options as people think. And look, all it takes is two. All you have to do is get one school bidding against another school and you can make some money. But I don't know that we're talking about schools on the level of Tennessee. You know, the USC got thrown out there. I don't know that USC's interested. UCLA maybe. But they brought in Joey Aguiar from Appalachian State and feel pretty good about him. So it really is going to come down to who is willing to be a buyer in this market. And remember, he cannot go anywhere in the SEC because you have to declare you're going to transfer by February 1st if you want to play immediately going SEC to SEC. So it really limits where he can go. Now, as far as Tennessee goes, I know they've put some feelers out already. I know you're not supposed to do that, but they've done that anyway. And I'll be curious to see if we get I'm entering the transfer portal on a do not contact tag on Wednesday, because I think if we see that, there's a good chance that person's moving to Knoxville. But I don't know, because we've heard about a quarterback or two getting raises suddenly in the last few days. So I think you might see a little bit of that going on. But also, it could be a case of Josh Heupel looking at Jake Merklinger and George McIntyre and saying, you know what, I think I'm good with what we got. And then they just maybe go into the portal for some depth.
Yeah. I mean, they love those guys coming out of high school. So, hey, now you're there. You got to put up or shut up. So we'll see what happens. Are you kind of hit on it with Tennessee. You said Tennessee's kind of putting out some feelers. Well, we also know that players just don't put themselves in the portal and then see what their options are. So Are you a little surprised that that this thing ended the way that it did, and knowing that Nico doesn't, he can't transfer within the SEC. So that takes out a lot of leverage, a lot of money. Are you a little bit surprised that this is the move that they made, knowing that, the feelers are out there and there's just not a lot coming back? Inside Scoop listeners, I got to tell you about a company that makes this show possible. It's Rhoback Activewear. The only way to describe Rhoback is best fit, best feel. And for those who are not familiar with Rhoback, they are completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rhoback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite. With novel polo designs, clean hoodie, and quarter zip designs from some of your favorite schools, it's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else in the market is pairing these level of custom designs with this quality of activewear. Rhoback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They are both super comfortable. They have an elastic waistband and a great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for everyday movement. Rhoback also has been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. So use code JOSH on Rhoback.com for a generous 20% off all new custom orders through the end of this week. Let's spell it out for you. RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with promo code JOSH.
I'm not surprised because these guys aren't professionals. They don't know what they're doing. Now, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe they had a deal set up since last week, and on Wednesday he goes in with a do not contact tag, and we find out the next day that he's been going somewhere all along. But given how bad these guys are at PR, we probably would have found out about that by now. So I don't know if that's the case. And if they are just going in saying, all right, he's available, that's not a good strategy right now.
All right. Well, it has been a crazy 72 hours since Pete Nakos on threes. Pete Nakos broke the big news that Nico was entering negotiations. Those fell apart. He is now not part of the program. And Andy, the portal opens on Wednesday. Do you think this is any indication that it could be a wild portal window?
I don't think it's going to be that wild. I think it's going to be similar to last year, but there might be some flashes. You know, last year it was a few defensive tackles that realized, oh, wow, we can get a big payday if we leverage these really desperate schools against each other. But that's different. You always are willing to take another good defensive tackle. If you're good on your quarterback situation, you're not going to overreach and pay a lot of money to get a guy. So I don't think there would be as many buyers. I do think if Tennessee decides they want to go get somebody, there will be domino effects from that. Right. If they decide they want to take somebody else's starter, then you will see a domino effect. But that's the one that I think would really make it move.
All right. Well, Andy, thanks for talking over these major developments that went down over the weekend. The portal opens on Wednesday. Get some rest. It's going to be wild.
Thanks, Josh.
We got Matt Ray from VolQuest. And Matt, you were one of the lucky few. You were inside Neyland Stadium yesterday, and this is coming about 24, 48 hours after the big Nico era coming to an end news. What was it like being in the stadium? Everybody from recruits to fans to players to coaches. What was the vibe in Neyland Stadium?
Yeah, Josh, I think obviously with the news breaking that Tennessee was moving in a different direction from Nico, I was interested going in what the vibe was going to feel like, and it just felt like, hey, that's exactly what Tennessee's doing. That's what it felt like the fans were doing. They were kind of hanging on every throw that Jake Merklinger and George McIntyre were making. I think Josh Heupel said it well when he said that, no person, including himself, is bigger than the power T. And I think that was a message, that really resonated and pretty much summed up the vibe of yesterday. I think you saw the collective group of fans that were there, obviously a limited capacity due to some ongoing construction at Neyland Stadium, really just throw their support behind, the guys that were out there. You heard that sentiment echoed from current players on the roster, Miles Kitzelman, really just saying, hey, we like the guys that we have here. Mm-hmm. We like this football team, and that's how we're moving forward. And that was really the vibe yesterday. And I thought that was pretty unique given how this situation played out and how much support the Tennessee fan base has put behind Nico, dating back to the early days of his recruitment.
Yeah. And, Not to say that this was a good thing for Tennessee. Obviously, you want to avoid a situation like this in the spring, but I could see how it could galvanize not just the team, but also recruiting in a way. I think there is a silver lining there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is as well, and I think you saw some of that with the team yesterday. Arian Carter said as much from the defensive side of the ball. The guys that are here are who we have, and that's who we're going to be. And I think it is a moment where Tennessee can kind of band together and push forward as a whole. And I think Josh Heupel's done an excellent job of leading that from his staff to the team and on to the recruiting trail.
All right. Well, let's hit on a couple of recruits. There's three big names that I want to talk to you about. We'll start with Braden Rouse. He's a top 10 linebacker from Marietta, Georgia. We know Tennessee likes to get into the state of Georgia and do some damage, and they got some competition because you got Georgia, of course, but now Michigan's kind of getting involved here. But after this visit with Rouse, what do you think? Where do you think Tennessee stands?
Well, I joked with Braden Rouse back in the winter, toward the end of January, 1st of February. I said, I think you've been here 5 times in 5 months now. I just felt like anytime he could get to Knoxville, he had been there. And, he told me when I visited with him in February at Cal High School that he didn't have any plans to return to Knoxville this spring because he'd been there so many times. He's comfortable. He knows the staff. He knows people in and around the building. He doesn't have to go fill some of those things out like he needs to go fill out some of these other programs. And as that period in January and really went on, he picked up every offer that you could pick up. I mean, he's a household name on the recruiting front, but Tennessee's just maintained consistency, stepping in the way that they've recruited him, and it allowed them to get him back up this weekend, which I think was big. He got a different experience this weekend than he has from all those other visits. He got to watch the orange and white game. He got to spend more time around some of the current players on the roster like Edwin Spillman and Jordan Burns, guys who were in his shoes not that long ago, but have also transitioned into the program and seen what things have been like under William Inge. And I think he really enjoyed that. So now for him, it's going to be about official visits. He's been pretty clear about that. He's going to take that slate of official visits, which will end at Tennessee the weekend of June 20th to the 22nd. And then he's going to make a decision before his senior season. And Tennessee continues to show really well there. They've done a really nice job of recruiting him, recruiting his family. And they've known for a while that he's going to be a big-time player. They were recruiting him like he was a top 10 linebacker before he was a top 10 linebacker, and that's why they, have been able to have such a foothold in this recruitment.
All right, let's move on to a big, nasty offensive lineman, Ganiver Carr. He's at IMG Academy, and, he's trending to the Florida Gators, but we've seen him up in Knoxville this weekend. What's your take here?
This was an important visit for Tennessee just to get him to campus. They've been trying to get him to campus for some time. He had already scheduled some official visits. Tennessee needed to get him there for an official visit. They needed to put their best foot forward this weekend. And, he said as much. He said, this visit exceeded my expectations. He's had a relationship with his staff for some time, but he wasn't sure what to expect just because he had not been to Knoxville. He really liked the culture. He really liked the family feel. He felt like it was very, genuine. And he's planning to return at some point in the month of June for an official visit, which will give Tennessee a shot to make a move in this recruitment. I do think it's going to be tough to get him out of the state of Florida, but I think with what Tennessee showed him this weekend, if they can capitalize on that again in June, then they're going to have a real shot at landing him down the stretch. I think what's going to be interesting for him is a decision timeline. He told me that he's not going to rush to a decision. He doesn't want to be a guy that's back and forth. He wants to find the right culture, the right football fit, and he wants to commit to that, and that could go on into the fall. So this could be a recruitment that could, see him take official visits in the summer and then, get him back to campus for an unofficial visit in the fall. So it seems like there's still some runway left there for Tennessee, but this was certainly a step in the right direction this weekend.
Yeah, none of these recruitments are going to be easy, and neither is the next one we're going to talk about. We're talking Hezekiah Harris. He's a top 100 prospect committed to Auburn, and you can see why he's so coveted. He goes 6'5", 230 pounds coming off the edge. Now, he's from Huntsville, Alabama, but This wasn't his first time on campus. So where do you think things stand with Harris and Tennessee?
I think Tennessee continues to be much in this recruitment. He has a long-standing relationship with new outside linebackers coach Lavorne Harbin, Coach Chop. I think that he's done an excellent job of recruiting him to this point. And I think that's the reason you've seen him come back to Tennessee, 2 times since the calendar's turned over to 2025 here. He's scheduled to be back in June on an official visit, and Tennessee is going to continue to swing at a guy like him. Tennessee has recruited that edge, that Leo position really effectively. And while Harbin hasn't always had that title, he's been one of the guys behind the scenes that's played a vital role in Tennessee securing some of these guys that they have. I mean, for example, another guy that was in town this weekend that's currently committed, CJ Edwards, New Jersey. He committed to Tennessee before ever taking a trip to campus because of his relationship with Harbin. He's a really good football player that's still going to generate some interest that Tennessee was in on early. And in Tennessee has continued to recruit him through that commitment to Auburn. They've continued to remind him that he's a priority. And he's fully aware that they are not going to go away. So as you said, Josh, another guy not going to be an easy recruitment, but I think Tennessee's going to be in this until the end, and he's not going to rush to make what will be a final decision, in my opinion. He understands that no matter kind of what happens, he understands that he's been committed to Auburn, but other schools haven't gone away. Tennessee hasn't gone away. Florida hasn't gone away. Other schools are still calling him. So he knows that if he takes official visits and makes a decision, the process probably still isn't going to end. So he's going to see this thing through to the finish line and do his due diligence. But Tennessee, very much in play, and he learned a lot more about his football fit this weekend, which is very important in my opinion.
All right, last question, and I got no reason to ask you this, but after the developments the last 36 hours, is everything good with Faison Brandon?
Yeah, Josh, I believe so. I mean, I think when you look at a guy like Faison Brandon, he's been rock solid to Tennessee from the start. I mean, he's a guy that has been pretty transparent throughout his process, where Tennessee stood for him before he was committed, and then once he's committed, he's continued to come back. He wants to be on campus as much as he can. Still very active behind the scenes as a peer recruiter, from what I'm told. So I think Tennessee continues to sit in a good spot there. But he's a guy that's coveted, and just like with all these guys that we've talked about, like a Hezekiah Harris, you'll hear of teams calling him, down the line. He's said as much when I recently talked to him. Alabama and LSU continue to call him. He continues to thank them for their time and lets them know that he's committed to Tennessee. But it's a recruiting process. So
All right. Well, interesting time in Knoxville. Appreciate you stopping by after the Tennessee spring game, or whatever they're calling it these days. A lot of recruiting going on. Life goes on. Recruiting goes on. Appreciate you, Matt Ray from VolQuest.
Yeah, thanks, Josh.
Pete Nakos, so we got the portal opening on Wednesday. Want to get your opinion on who are some of the big buyers this time around?
Yeah, you kind of look at the college football landscape right now. Michigan is definitely going to have a need at wide receiver and offensive line, and I think we're going to need to also see what Michigan does in the portal when it comes to quarterback. They obviously have Bryce Underwood. They obviously have Jaden Davis, but there's some questions with Mikey Keene and what that's going to look like, and if they need to bring someone else in. Obviously, Keene has been limited this spring. And then elsewhere across the country, Bill Belichick is gearing up for his first season of college football. He needs to go get a quarterback this spring. That is going to be a big focus point that I think a lot of the nation kind of turns its attention to. And then Ohio State has a big need at defensive tackle. Texas Tech is going to be a buyer. They've proven to be a buyer. They're going to be a buyer again. Penn State kind of needs maybe a couple more wide receivers. So, yeah, there's a lot of needs across the country right now.
So when it comes to, we know that there's going to be a lot of demand, but what about the supply? What positions will serve up the best talent? Is it quarterback and O-line? I mean, where can teams really go to upgrade some of these positions?
So maybe the most needed position right now is offensive tackle. That's one thing we keep hearing a lot about right now. And you can never have enough edge rushers and just top defensive linemen. So I think those two spots are really going to be a focal point. But the news of this past week at Tennessee and Nico Imaleva's departure is really going to set some quarterback dominoes, I believe.
All right. Yeah, and that leads to my next question. What does Tennessee do when the portal opens? I mean, we already saw kind of the storm brewing with Mike Matthews. He's staying at Tennessee, at least for now. Do we, one, see more players enter the portal from the Tennessee Volunteers, or do we see Tennessee get active in acquiring talent?
Yeah, so Tennessee now has 2 scholarship quarterbacks on its roster, so that is definitely going to have to be a position of attention and need right now. They have George McIntyre, the freshman, and then Jake Merkinger, the redshirt freshman, and both guys are going to have a shot to compete for the job. I think what's going on right now at Tennessee is there's a conversation of, do we go bring in a guy who has the experience, who can come in and start day one in the SEC, or do we go get a guy that is going to challenge George and Jake, but also sets George and Jake up for an opportunity to compete for the job and maybe set us up for the 26 and 27 seasons beyond just 2025. Now, the one thing you get asked too, Josh, is do we see more players leave Tennessee? I think Tennessee did a heck of a job in December of keeping their roster together, and when a lot of stuff was kind of, there was a lot going on at Tennessee in December all across the board, and we continue to learn more about it. Tennessee did a really nice job of keeping that roster together, and they're going to have to continue to do it in the spring.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, what does Nico do moving forward?
So wrote a intel story on Saturday after the news broke that he's going to enter the transfer portal. In that story, we mentioned USC and Notre Dame. I think those are 2 really unlikely destinations at this point, but leading up to Saturday's news, they had really been talked about in a lot of circles. The one school I keep hearing a lot about as of Sunday is UCLA. It's close to home, can make a lot of sense going back to the West Coast. Bringing someone like that to that program could be a game changer. And then, the one other school that there's 2 more schools that Texas Tech keeps being brought up because of the money they have. I don't expect the Red Raiders to be a factor in this. They're really happy with who they're bringing back, and Baron Morton. And then we kicked off the show talking about North Carolina. They need a quarterback. Is Bill Belichick and Nico the right fit? I don't know if I'm the one to answer that question, but that's going to be something that's speculated about a lot in the coming week.
Yeah, all eyes on that recruitment when the portal opens on Wednesday. Now, it seems like there's still a good amount of teams with major needs to fill. Is this going to be an expensive time to fill those needs?
Yeah, nothing comes at a cheap in the transfer portal. It always comes at a premium when you're trying to stock these really high level, important positions. Now, the one thing that I am very curious to see how it plays out in the next week is the quarterback position across the country. Obviously, ACC, Big Ten, and Big 12 quarterbacks in transferring to Tennessee. There's no intra-conference transferring right now in the SEC in the spring. That's a league rule. I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to get raises. I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to try to leverage what's going on at Tennessee right now. And I also think that even if Tennessee doesn't make some phone calls, I'm sure some quarterbacks are going to be trying to get that pay raise to if they're threatening to leave or trying to get one last boost right before the fall. So really interested to see what the quarterback market looks like in the next 15 days.
Yeah, it's going to get crazy here in the next couple of days. And Pete Nakos, your report on Thursday kind of set things off with Nico potentially renegotiating. That led to him no longer being a part of the program anymore. And it's only been about 72 hours since that story broke. So who knows what the next couple of days are going to be hold for us. Pete Nakos, have fun with the transfer portal when it opens on Wednesday.
Thanks, Josh.
Got Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck. And Justin, I just want to read you a Jackson Cantwell quote from about 7 days ago. Quote, "I might be closer to the end than I thought." He was speaking about his recruitment there. And he went on to say, "I don't know how an OV would change that really." Then about 3 or 4 days later, we got word that Jackson Cantwell is going to take one more official visit, and that will be to Oregon, and it will be next weekend. So it seems significant. Is it significant?
Yeah, you got to think so. I mean, I'm just picturing like a phoenix rising from the ashes, and that being Oregon and Dan Lanning. So You and I think anymore, especially on the heels of the Nico news, anything's possible in recruiting. Anything's possible with the transfer portal. So, I would say this is pretty significant because if you're Oregon, you probably weren't feeling all that good about your chances with Jackson Cantwell. And, this definitely feels like a last ditch, last pitch sort of an effort. But, in today's recruiting, we all know that anything can change in a minute. So I think getting him on campus and giving yourself a shot to, sit down at the table and go over things one more time. And we will both assume that he doesn't take any more visits. You're essentially the last visit. So Cantwell has not been on campus in several months now for Oregon. So, for me, even prior to things kind of going there, I wasn't feeling great about Oregon's chances just because he's been taking other visits, hasn't been to Oregon in a while, and that's usually a pretty good telltale sign.
Yeah, do you think the Oregon staff kind of went into overdrive and seeing that quote about him being ready to decide? Do you think they knew, hey, if we're going to have a shot at him, we have to get him on campus one more time?
I absolutely do. There's no question in my mind that's what Oregon did. And credit to them, right? I mean, you've got somebody that's saying that they're pretty close to being ready to making a decision, and you can, hey, just give us one last look, come check us out again. The big equation here is track and field is very much a part of his recruitment, and Oregon has leaned heavy into that. So I'm sure that, they'll revisit that part once again, as well as the football side of things. And yeah, I mean, I would say Oregon was a long shot for sure. But now with this visit, it's going to be real interesting to see if they're able to kind of come back around and take the lead or be a contender, or what'll come of it.
Well, the word long shot, it's a relative term because last week Pete Nakos of On3 came out and said that there's 3 teams trending right now in Jackson Cantwell's recruitment above the rest. And he named the top 6, but he said the teams that are really in it right now, Georgia, Miami, and Oregon. So knowing that those are kind of the 3 teams, obviously you felt like Oregon was on the outside looking in of Georgia and Miami prior to this news, but now with the news of Cantwell coming in for one last official visit, how do you kind of handicap these 3 programs heading into this, what could be a very important weekend?
Yeah, I think Miami's got the upper leg right now. I think they're the team to beat, and I think had this visit not taken place, they're probably putting Jackson Cantwell on their commit list. But now, I think this really boils down to probably Oregon versus Miami here, and Mario Cristobal, offensive line head coach.
Yep.
Alex Mirabal is a great offensive line coach down there in Miami. I know those two well from covering them at Oregon. So I don't blame Jackson Cantwell for looking, as an offensive lineman, for looking hard at Miami. So, the Ducks have done well under Dan Lanning, putting guys into the league. Obviously, Josh Connerly is a borderline first round, early second round offensive tackle that they recruited and developed out of high school. So I'm sure they'll lean into that as well. I do think Oregon has to catch Miami in this one. I think Georgia's probably, I don't want to say out of the running, but feels like a distant third at the moment.
All right, so I want to wrap it up with this. I just connecting some dots here, Justin, doing the science a little bit, but I'm looking ahead to May 5th. I know it's Cinco de Mayo, but it's also the day that number 1 quarterback Jared Curtis commits. Do you think there's anything going on with Jared Curtis on May 5th and Jackson Cantwell saying he wants to wrap it up a little bit earlier? There's a lot of talk about 2 teams here, Georgia and Oregon, when it comes to Jared Curtis and Jackson Cantwell. Do you think at all the 2 are tied together here?
I certainly believe so. I mean, if you're Oregon, what's the best thing you can do? You can get a 5-star commitment at the most important position for a quarterback, a left tackle potentially, right ahead of it. So I'm sure if you're Oregon, you're really going to make a serious play here because it could have implications with Oregon for Jared Curtis on May 5th. And it's no secret, Oregon's kind of just been quiet recruiting. There hasn't been a commitment in a while. It just hasn't been much of a banner year 2025 in terms of recruiting, the year 2025 that is, recruiting for Oregon. So, I have no doubt. I know Dan Lanning's going to do what Dan Lanning does. He's just kind of waiting back there, but that would be quite the splash to double down with Cantwell and Curtis if he can manage to pull that off.
Boy, would it. Oregon fans, talk to us. Do you think there's something brewing with 5-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell and 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis and, of course, the Oregon Ducks? Let us know. Comment section below. We got to talk some USC recruiting, and we're going to start with this Nico Imaliava rumors. Obviously he left Tennessee. They broke up. That's well known. And the transfer portal opens on Wednesday, and there have been reports that USC is going to be involved in pursuing Nico. We got you on here, Scott Schrader from We Are SC. What's your opinion on that? Do you think USC and Nico is a good fit?
This is how I put it with our subscribers at We Are SC, and I like Nico a lot. I think Nico is a tremendously talented quarterback. I personally would have thought it would be exceptionally risky to bring him in at this point. After in December, going through some a buzz that Miami was coming after Jade Maiava, their current number one quarterback. And they got that all figured out. I think in the process, Jaden probably lost a couple of agents, and here he is at USC, kind of gaining steam as a leader on that football team right now, looking really, really, like he's progressed significantly in the last few months since the end of last season. And it's just USC is not pursuing Nico, so we'll go ahead and add that in there as well. But I think that if this would have been something that would have happened in December, I would have thought it would have been potentially a big pickup for them.
Do you think USC kind of learned a lesson from the whole Bear Alexander situation last season?
Yeah, I think that really threw them for a loop. There were a lot of negotiations that went on just to have him make the final decision to not enter the NFL draft. He came to USC as a guy nobody really had ever heard of, and had a lot of issues he had to work on, and USC spent 2 years developing this guy into a really good offensive lineman, one of the top linemen in the conference, and they signed an NIL deal, and then I think less than a month later, he's bouncing to Oregon. So, yeah, we're talking Emmanuel Pregnone, but it was Bear Alexander and Emmanuel Pregnone that I think that they kind of have learned their lesson on, as far as if it's going to be a focus 100% on NIL. And you and I both know that has to be a big part of the equation. But if that is driving the ship, so to speak, USC doesn't want really anything to do with those guys.
All right, let's turn our focus to high school recruiting, and there's quite a bit going on the USC campus over the weekend. On Friday, it was Modern Day. They were in the house. Modern Day commitment, Tom Tupoi, was back on campus at USC, but so was his teammate, wide receiver Caden Dixon Wyatt. Now, he's been taking a lot of visits this spring. Where do you think USC sits for Dixon Wyatt right now?
Yeah, I think that like the reporting that's going on, Steve Wiltfong and Chad Simmons have been on this from a national level, probably as good as anybody. And I think USC has been behind Oregon and Ohio State, and just the vibe I'm getting is that that's still kind of the case right now. He's a big priority. They're trying to get him on campus anytime that USC's putting a lot of effort to get guys on campus, like they are with Caden. And every time that somebody like him ends up on campus, that's obviously helping USC's chances. He also has an official visit set for June. He'll probably be back on campus, before that as well. So, right now, signing day was coming up here in the next few days. I would think that USC would not be where he would choose, but as long as he keeps showing up on campus, there's always a shot.
All right, and still some time to do some work with Caden Dixon Wyatt. Now, another Modern Day prospect was on campus, and that's linebacker Sean Scott. How big of a priority is he right now for the Trojans?
Yeah, that's somebody I think they're really trying to close the deal on with him. He's a big linebacker target for USC. I don't know how he's being recruited by other schools, if it's as an edge or a linebacker, but for USC, he's one of their top linebacker prospects. And this is something that you and I always talk about who's going to be the next commit, and I'm sure that's going to be coming up here after this. But he's a guy to look out for USC. I think his interest is exceptionally high, and USC's interest is also really high in him. So it's just a matter, I think, of just getting stuff worked out.
All right. So we know that the spring game's coming up, but this was another big weekend to have recruits on campus. So what other intel you got for USC fans coming out of this weekend?
Well, they had a couple of high-profile defensive linemen that came for visits this past weekend. Trenton Henderson came from Pensacola, Florida. He's a top 100 kid. Also had Luke Waffle from New Jersey. He might even be like a top 50 prospect for on three. He is at the top of the list right now of USC targets for defensive linemen. They've got about 3 spots left. I think they're going to take one more edge. And they're feeling pretty good about one right now in KJ Ford. So they got a couple spots for the interior guys, and Luke Waffle is, hopefully I'm saying his name right. Is among the highest of priorities. So he was there. So was Tristan Givens from Columbus, Georgia, another top 100 kid. So I'm told that those guys are all set to come back for official visits. So we'll see how that works out in a few months from now. But I also had Danny Lang from Mater Dei. He's a top safety prospect for the class of 2027. So I thought I'd mention him. Jalen Hill is another one from St. John Bosco. USC has done really well with the class of 2026 local defensive backs. They've got like 4 or 5 committed right now. Class of 2027 is kind of going in the same direction as the class of 2026 from that position group right now. And then Jalen Hill and Danny Lang and Aaron Washington was on campus earlier this week. Those are some top guys that the USC is pursuing. And the last one that I should mention is Jaron Jones from Mission Viejo, class of 2026 cornerback. Is another guy that was on campus, and I think he's somebody we might be looking out for also down the road here.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you who's next. And the reason I got to ask you who's next is because every time we have you on to talk USC recruiting, we hang up and then there's like 3 commits right after we're done with the video. USC absolutely killing it this spring. So in your opinion, who could be the next to commit to the Trojans?
Sean Scott is the one that pops into my head immediately. I think Sam Utu, offensive lineman from Orange Lutheran, which is another local school. He's another one that we put, I think, multiple predictions. I know Steve and I put predictions in for him for USC. But I believe he's going to take all of his visits before he makes a decision or a school choice in July. I think USC is kind of suggesting that he take his visits just so these guys really do need to see as many schools as possible before they actually do commit. I think that's always the preferred method, but he's another one. And there's going to be a bunch of guys that will be coming for visits here again in the upcoming weeks. It could be among that group, but I would put Sean Scott probably at the top of the list right now.
All right, USC fans, talk to us. Who do you think is going to be the next to commit to the Trojans? Let us know.